Welcome and shalom. My name is Al, and this is our fourth part of our series, Matthew 24, Israel the Fig Tree, and the Signs of Our Times. In this particular episode, we're going to be talking about hardcore biblical prophecy come true. And as we talked about the house of Yahweh, where it was located on Mount Moriah, the mountain of Yah, which is in the city of David, the city of Jerusalem, the country of Israel, the center of the world. Pick it up in Matthew 24, verse 2, and it says, "And Jesus, Yeshua, said unto them," after they had just had a heated conversation with the Pharisees, "You see all these things. Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And they left the city. Okay, the question is, why, who, and how was this house destroyed? And we pick it up in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 22, one more time. "And Solomon was told, Yes, this is a house for my name, which you have built, but if you worship other gods, it will become a desolation. And it shall be answered, because they forsook Yahweh the Almighty, their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold of other gods." So, we can say that the Romans destroyed the house, but why? Because the Israelites were deceived enough to worship other gods, and that is why the Father used the Romans as his hand, like he did the Greeks, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Syrians before them, to punish his people, which are named after himself. They are Yahweh's. They are believers in Yahweh. So, this is why the house was destroyed. Who destroyed it? The Israelites let go of their life, as David did for a short time. Satan got into the house and killed a lot of them. And now the Romans are killing much more. So that's how it took place. But in order to understand this, let's get a closer look and take a look at the book of Daniel. And we're going to go now to chapter 9, and it's going to be verse 26. Again, hardcore biblical prophecy. "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end there shall be with a flood unto the end, with war and desolations." Now, we take a look at my timeline here. This is the house of Yahweh standing here. Yeshua came, was cut off somewhere about 28, 29 Common Era. Okay, he's crucified, he's gone. But his prophecy that the house would be destroyed is settled on a particular verse 34 of Matthew 24, and it says, "This generation." And what we're going to see throughout the scriptures, particularly in the book of Daniel, is that this number, this 70, is going to be used in relation to how the Father works with his people again and again and today. If we were to go from Yeshua's birth, which is about 4 BCE. And we take this 70 years and we go to when this house was destroyed, which is going to take place about 69 Common Era. We reach our 70 years or generation. Now, how it took place was this. Biblical prophecy works through politics and economics. That is how it masquerades it. But under the surface, it's always the Father in control of everything. Now, it manifested itself in this form. The Jews were tired of the Romans. Everybody was tired of the Romans. And finally, they're getting built up to the point of open resistance against the Romans. Nero, now do you remember Nero, the Caesar of Rome, the maniac? He was Caesar of Rome. And what did he do? He burned Rome. Why? Because he was a maniac. The repercussions on Caesar in Rome were so great that his political position was very jeopardized. He could throw the Christians to the lions, but that wasn't enough to placate his people. So what he does, he has his Judean governor called Florus excite the Jews, and what do? They rebel. They rebel against him, and they actually kick the Romans out of the country. And this is what we call the Great Revolt. In 66 AD, the Great, and here we can so much call it Jewish revolt against Rome. They kick the Romans out of the country. So that takes place, and what we start to see is now Nero can divert all of his attention toward Judea, hiring people in the military, corporations, companies at the time getting involved with stocking the army, and he's sending them forth. So now it's a massive army descending upon Israel, walking around the Middle East, coming in through Egypt from both sides. And the primary general at this time who was in charge of this Roman expeditions, his name is Vespasian. He had a son called Titus, who was one of his commanders. Through time, Nero, the pressure on Nero is so great back in Rome, he commits suicide. The year is now somewhere about 67 BCE. As there is a vacuum of power in Rome for who will be the next Caesar, and they get several weak men who try to become Caesar, but they soon fall through the various intrigues within the political structure of Rome. And Vespasian tells himself, I will try to become Caesar, because he already had a massive army underneath him. Julius did the same thing, and later on Constantine will do the same thing. So he marches on Rome and actually succeeds and becomes the next Caesar. Meanwhile, his son Titus, who is now the primary general in charge of destroying the rebellion of the Great Revolt, he will go on because his father is now Caesar. He's not only general, he will become a prince that will come and destroy the city. Exactly what Daniel 9:26 prophesied. Hardcore prophecy comes true. But not only that, the real scriptural prophecy is that this generation will live to see its own destruction. And when we follow Yeshua's 70 years, and we come out to 69, exactly when the temple was finally destroyed by the Romans. It took them about 10 months to break through the city walls. Now, here we are. We're looking at the house of Yahweh. it was a massive structure. If we were to look at it and compare it to what Herodian blocks are left today, each block that went into this wall of building this structure had to have been almost 40% of this whiteboard in size and depth. So we're talking about a massive work. But Yeshua said not one block would be upon another. You can burn this, but it's still not going to knock these blocks down. So how is the prophecy fulfilled? And the prophecy is fulfilled in this way, that the inside of this house of Yahweh was lined with cedar from Lebanon. On top of that cedar, gold was painted, was tacked to the walls. They wanted to embellish it as great as they could. But as the attack on Jerusalem was chaotic, the house caught on fire, the cedar wood burned, the gold melted. And what happened to the gold? It got into the cracks. And the further it got down, it got into more and more cracks of these giant blocks. So how are you going to get the gold out? You have to knock the wall down. And that is prophecy fulfilled in a nutshell for everyone. The first characteristic of Matthew 24 that Yeshua, when he is sitting on the Mount of Olives, tells his disciples is verse 4. Take heed, take attention to yourself, that no man deceive you. Now, in order to see this, we always have to go back to the precedent. What took place in the beginning? And this can actually all be traced back to Genesis 3:1 and the garden. The garden, the man, the woman, and the serpent. And of course, his promise is that you shall be able to eat of the tree of knowledge and not die. Is my Apple computer? Is this not symbolic of knowledge? Well, look at the world we live in today, and since these two were thrown out of the garden, everybody is only made, formed, and breathed, and that last breath is your last, and you die. That is why Yeshua came, and why he tells us later on, you must be born again. So with this in consideration, we have to consider also who's going to deceive you and how is he going to deceive you. This is a computer. It's spelled like this. Computer in your English alphabet. And if we were to take the A and give it a value of 6, and B, the value of 12, and C, which we don't have in Hebrew, the value of 18, and we go all the way down to Z. When we spell computer, when we add these numbers up, of course it equals 666. And this is not Yahweh's son. It is the son of the enemy, the serpent. We pick up the enemy, Satan, and by the way, my Jewish friends, in Chronicles 21:20, First Chronicles, it's spelled in the pictograph like this, which we already talked about before. The teeth surround and devour life. What a serpent does. We've seen through the kings, queens, religious leaders of Israel that they have fallen into worshiping many gods, and Israel has been devastated. The Assyrians, Romans, Greeks, Babylonians. Don't tell me it was the Christians that did this to you. This was your choice because you were deceived. And the bottom line is it goes back to how does this take place again and again and again. So follow me as we continue the story. A good place to pick it up is in our next Hebraic pictograph. It's called Sadiq. It's pronounced Sadiq, and it is the 18th letter in their alphabet. We don't have this sound in English, the S. We have already seen here in the 8th or 11th letter, it is the Nun, and it means life and action. Here we see our little spermacete on his side because he's not having such a good time. He's struggling. And it carries the meaning of need, desire. And also it carries the meaning of hook. A later evolution of this particular letter is going to be like this, where indeed it is a hook. It is a hook. You need food, but you want more. And the more you want, the more you get hooked. And it's in this respect that the false prophets have always come to Israel and later the Christian period and will tell you what you want to hear. It's not going to be against what you're already doing, and that is why Israel has always rejected their real prophets, why they were prophesying. And this will be a repetitive scenario in the Christian period. This is an interesting concept right here. We have the Pope. The Pope. We can call him the Poppy. Today, in our 8th video, the Vatican and its sexual abuse cover-ups and much, much more, this can actually be petty for pedophile. For this is a big problem in the Catholic Church today and some other organizations. But the whole thing is, it all goes back to what Yeshua, Jesus, was telling us back in Matthew 24:4. The first thing that you have to be aware of is do not be deceived. Continuing with the word to deceive, of course we have to go back to the beginning, the garden, the man, the woman, and the serpent. And in Genesis 3:15, the very second prophecy in the scriptures, Bereshit 1:1 being first, Genesis 1:1, the second one is the seed of the woman shall grow up and crush the head of the serpent, which is Satan. That is the promise that Yahweh has made to mankind. The man and woman are kicked out of the garden, and their first progeny is Cain and Abel, 2 sons. But what happens is Cain kills his brother and is banished himself. So this house produces no seed. It is neutralized. We come now to Abraham. Abraham will go on to have a son of promise. He's almost 100 years old. His wife is almost the same age. So it is a child of promise, whereas he already had a natural son in the form of Ishmael, which the father says, this is not what I want for you. The son I am going to give you is of your body. And from this moment on, we're going to find how unique Abraham is, how he will be tested, and particularly his progeny down the line to eventually arrive at the seed of the woman that will crush the head of the serpent. Our next house for consideration is Isaac's house himself. he will have two sons, Esau and Jacob. The promise will go to Jacob, as Esau almost killed him. We continue down the line and we come to David and Solomon. And all along the way, the Father is saying, I will establish my covenant with your seed, with your seed. Each is given this promise. Finally, we get to David, who Nathan prophesied that your seed shall build my house. Now, Solomon will be the actual builder. However, Solomon will fall, lead Israel into sin, and the country will be divided in half between Judah and Israel. 10 against 2. Just like Jacob's house was divided 10 brothers against 1 brother. Now it's 2 against 10. Just telling you what is coming up in the future, we will talk about the 2 houses of Israel. But for now, we will continue with this presentation. But the fruit of these 2 being split apart is the Assyrians will move in, the Babylonians will move in, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, and devastate Israel because of deception taking place, and it will manifest itself politically, economically, in false gods. One characteristic I want you to notice throughout all of this, and that is in Genesis 10:10, we come across this word for the first time. It's called Babel, and it can be interpreted as the gate of Bel or the false god Bel, which will later on morph into Baal, and finally way down the line we can even interpret it as Lord. Either way, it's all about getting away from what the Father wants people to be doing. Time we get to Yeshua, Jesus, we pick it up in Matthew chapter 4, and I want you to consider this because the rabbis have lost track of Satan. And if this isn't the fruit of Satan, then truly your eyes are blinded. Matthew 4 verse 8 says, Again the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And he says to him, All these things I will give you, if you would but worship me. Now, because Yeshua finally was the seed of the woman, of course he's not going to worship him, because he knows he comes once, he comes again, and then he gets to crush the head of the enemy. But what we see is men have always taken the enemy up on his offer. That's why this Babel, this Baal, which are the false gods that made Israel fall into worshiping and idolatry, will continue with us as we move down the timeline, changing, morphing, disguising itself as Yeshua after the first century of the Messianic believers who finally were called Christians in a derogatory manner. After they died off, the false religion will come racing into Christianity in the form of Babylon the Great. We saw here previously. And Babylon the Great we have already identified as the Vatican. And through the Vatican, it's many false churches and doctrines. Finally, we come to our second 70-year period. And now we see Israel, 1948 until now. Just like the Great Revolt in 66, things were great for them for the first year and a half, 2 years. And after that, the Romans came back. And that's where this presentation is all about, to show you that this planet that you live in is in the hands of the enemy. And until Messiah comes back to crush the head of the enemy, this is our world that we live in. But the Messiah had also given us signs of our times to mark this and know where we stand, and then the process, so can you.